A very good morning to you. It's Matt Chorley on Times Radio and now live on the Times Radio YouTube channel. So if you are near a computer, basically if you're not driving, get online to your YouTubes. I'll join you now. So you go to youtube.com, there we are, and then you click on that and then you do search Times Radio. Don't be distracted by anything else. Don't be distracted by your Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg videos. Then click on Times Radio, there we are, and then you go, it's got PMQs Unpacked. Rishi will face questions over Zahawi. There we are, click on that. 50 people already there. Why? It's because you can come and see me, see what's going on right now. First one in this morning, Candia in snowy upstate New York. Patricia is in Morton-on-the-Marsh. Stephen's in Taunton. Morning, Stephen. Sally's in Manchester. Lovely stuff. Log on right now and you can watch along. PMQs Unpacked coming live at 12. And then at 12:30, Lara Spirit will round us up with the best of the rest. And Lara's here now. We don't really need you, though, Lara, because everyone's already said it's going to be Nadeem Zahawi.
That professionalism, integrity, accountability would be at the forefront of his premiership. So I think it'd be difficult, given how kind of perfectly ready-made this issue might seem to be in the Nadeem Zahawi affair, for Keir Starmer not to major on that today. I think you'd be very surprised if it didn't.
It's interesting because we're now 10 to 12. There was definitely a school of thought that said that Nadeem Zahawi might have resigned by now to spare Rishi Sunak the embarrassment of having to defend him today and then possibly sack him later.
Yeah, I mean, you'll remember James Cleverly on the broadcast round on Sunday, the Foreign Secretary, being asked if he'd be in his job by Wednesday. And I remember there being some quite incredulous reactions to that, as if, of course, he'll be gone by Wednesday. That would be absurd. But, he's very much still here. And by the indications that we've had, it looks like Nadeem Zahawi, deluded or not, feels like he's confident that he can ride this out. We saw last night on Talk TV, Bima Falami saying, he'd been lobbied by Nadeem Zahawi, as had other colleagues who was sort of, protesting his innocence and justifying why he thought it was that he would stay. But nonetheless, obviously, we've got to wait out this investigation. I think it'd be very unlikely for Keir Starmer not to raise the question today as to why, if Nadeem Zahawi is so confident, we haven't had all the full details sooner.
It's definitely true as well. We've got coming up on the focus group, which is going to air tomorrow, which I know you were listening to last night.
That was brilliant, yeah.
They're the group, and they're not representative. They're just a random group of people we've selected, but they're furious about the Nadeem Zahawi thing's got massive cut through.
Yeah, it's interesting because very often, when you're a journalist and you're looking at these stories and writing them up, you will very often be criticised for saying, this is a Westminster bubble story. Do people actually care? The backdrop is this very severe cost of living crisis. Do people want to talk about that? They want to talk about how public services are being affected by, large-scale strikes and the lack of a breakthrough still on those. But actually, you're right. I think, last night was an indication, but also I think we've had other indications, in polls and wide public that actually, people do really care about this kind of thing. And it is perfectly ill-timed, of course, with the self-assessment deadline fast approaching.
Well, that's the other
Taxes
thing.
Are on people's minds.
It's just more on people's minds. Let us know if you are on the YouTube channel, as well, hundreds of you already are. Let us know what you think Keir Starmer should do. Should he just go on Nadeem Zahawi? Should he talk about other things as well? And actually, if you are there and you're already watching, tell your friends. Put it on your social media. Text your friends and tell them to watch it. Send them a fax, whatever it is you need to do to get in touch with them. And then you're going to be back to do Best of Rest. You'll keep an eye on anybody. Have you looked at the order paper yet? Is there anyone in particular who might leap up?
I haven't looked at it yet, but I think it'll be interesting to see what Stephen Flynn, the SNP leader, goes for today, of course, given the SNP's controversial gender reforms being very much in the news and his very bullish performance last week in PMQ. So I think that will be very interesting to see. And also, of course, we're very used in PMQs in recent weeks to seeing backbench Conservative MPs stand up and praise what they think will be upcoming successful levelling up bids for funding. And of course, we saw the results from those last week, and some of the MPs that have been shouting loud and proud about how fantastic that round 2 funding weren't given funding in the eventual outcome. And I think we'll be unhappy about that. So it'll be interesting to see if that funding comes up today from some of the backbenchers. So those are a few of the things that we'll be looking for.
Yeah, can't say I don't. Rob Roberts, he's still a Conservative MP? He's definitely on the list anyway. So is Marco Longhi, Edward Timpson, he is an independent MP. It's hard to keep track of all the independent MPs. You'll keep an eye on all of those. And then you red box, email, PMQs Unpacked in your inbox.
In your inbox to subscribers.
At what time?
At 2:30, no later.
2:30. So, if you are a Times subscriber and you receive, sign up to Redbox, thetimes.co.uk/Redbox. And as well as getting Patrick Maguire in your inbox every morning at 8:30 on a Wednesday after PMQs at 2:30, you get Lara as well, rounding it all up. If you want the full multimedia PMQs experience. Loads of you saying hello. Yeah, just tell your friends. Greeting comrades from the independent Fraternal Republic of West Ealing. Nice to see you. Looking forward to watching No Questions Being Answered from Vienna, says Matt. Oh, there we are. Posh, lovely stuff. Nice to see you. Lara, I'll let you get off and get poised. Get your popcorn ready. Lovely. Right, PMQs Unpacked is coming at 12 o'clock. Tim Shipman will be here for that. But before that, who's written this? There was a time when I was thought as a young person in journalism. Am I not still a young... I know Lara's a young person in journalism. But Lara, prepare to feel old. We're going to speak to someone who makes me look ancient. Who's written this? We're going to speak to Josh Tate. He's a 16-year-old newsreader from Ufcombe in Devon. Morning, Josh.
Good morning, Matt. How are you doing?
Well, I was all right until I started reading what my colleagues have been writing. So, Josh, you're how did you end up as we're calling you Britain's youngest newsreader?
Well, I just finished my GCSEs and I wanted some work experience, to be honest. And my friend's mum was, my best friend's mum and my mum were at maternity at the same time together, or they're in the maternity ward, sorry. And I've always wanted to do something about like media, and I turned up for what was just going to be an interview about doing sports reporting at the local radio station, so Devon's Radio X, and I was told I had a great voice, and it went, and from that point onwards, it's just everything's changed really.
So you're now reading the news on the Radio X breakfast show.
Well, yeah, 1 or 2 mornings a week.
Yeah.
I only started that last week, though.
Wow. And how do you, you have got I have to say, Josh, you have got a lovely voice for a 16-year-old. Not all 16-year-old boys' voices have settled down quite so nicely. Do you think you'll stick with this?
I hope so. My dream is to be a Formula One anchor, I think, on Sky Sports, something like that perhaps. Or maybe even on TalkSport, a show on there, to be honest. That's what I'm really into. I
can have
sport.
a word. I can pop upstairs and have a word. TalkSport's our sister station, so we can try and sort that out. My former producer, Alex, on the Red Box podcast, is now a commentator for Formula One. So I basically suggested I can get you all manner of jobs. What will you be doing alongside? Presumably you're at school at something at the same time.
So I'm at college at the moment,
Yeah.
and college is my priority at the moment, being at college, to get my college course done. So I'm at Exeter College at the moment. So I'm Devon boy. I know you're from Somerset over the border, but
both of us have avoided picking up the accent, though. I noticed, Josh.
Luckily, no offence.
And what tips have you been given for reading the news properly? Because we're going to get you to read the midday headlines in a sec. So have you been given some tips on how to read the news properly?
Well, just to be quite conversational, confident in my speaking, and not to stress or overthink if something goes wrong, because being in a live studio, you can learn from other people's mistakes. And I can tell you that because the boss of Radio X told me to watch and learn when he went live to announce the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, resigning. And when it was a live show, he said it was Theresa May, and I had to correct him.
Yeah, that's always a good thing. How are you on pronunciations? Because it's basically the worst bit of my job, is particularly when I open a script for a sort of live news story, and I've got no idea how to pronounce that name or place which is looming in the script.
That could be a struggle, but you just have to be confident, and what happens.
That is a very good point. If in doubt, just take a good run up at it and just say it like you mean it. So Ufcombe is a prime example. A producer was I can't remember how you were even mispronouncing it, Andrew, but Ufcombe. Ofcom. But I suppose the fact you're from Devon means that you know what all those places are.
Yeah. So how do you say it? It's Ufcombe, isn't it?
Ufcombe. That's how I'd say it.
Ufcombe, yeah.
Well, you live there.
Yeah. Well, I went to school there for the last 5 years, and
yeah. Very good, very good. And then after you finish your A levels, what will you do next? Do you think?
I'm hoping to go to university, I think, or maybe even an apprenticeship. But anything that comes up, I'm just grateful for all the opportunities which are coming my way at the moment, and I appreciate all the things that are going on.
Absolutely right. Well, here we go then. You're about to get reading the news on Times Radio on your CV. Are you ready?
I think so.
Yeah. Of course. Normally when I do the midday headlines on a Wednesday, I almost always fluff one of them. So you are allowed one fluff, Josh. Right, get ready then. Stand by your beds. PMQs Unpacked is coming next. Tim Shipman is here, poised. He's got a caffeinated drink and everything. He's pumped and lively and ready to go. Get on the YouTube channel now. PMQs Unpacked is next on Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
It's 12 o'clock. I'm Matt Chorley and this is Times Radio. PMQs Unpacked is next, but first the news with Josh Tate.
At 12 o'clock, I'm Josh Tate. The Prime Minister and French President have welcomed news from Germany that it will allow its Leopard 2 tanks to be sent to Ukraine after weeks of persuasion. Britain agreed to send 14 tanks 2 weeks ago, and the US is expected to send 30 as well. The head of the Metropolitan Police says poorly policy and decision-making led to former PC David Carrick becoming and remaining an officer. Sir Mark Rowley's apologised to women across London for the case, which involved sex offences against 12 victims. A Conservative peer has become the latest Tory to call on Nadeem Zahawi to consider his position. Lord Robert Hayward, a former MP, said the Conservative Party chairman should think about standing aside while Parliament's ethics watchdog investigates his tax affairs. And the Home Secretary's plan to reduce the time for foreign students can stay in the UK after finishing their course is being strongly opposed by the Department of Education. At the moment, they can stay for up to 2 years without a requirement for getting a job, but Suella Braverman wants that to be 6 months. However, leaked advice has revealed that the Department for Education is attempting to block the changes as they would harm the UK's attractiveness to international students. There'll be more news in half an hour.
Josh, thanks so much for the news. Josh, thanks so much for coming on and doing that. Best of luck with it all. I have a feeling you'll be back. We can get rid of Karma Bentley.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on today.
Good luck with it all, Josh. That's Josh Tate there, Britain's youngest newsreader reading our news. Now, though, it's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. Unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
Order, order. I call Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman.
And Tim Shipman's here. Were you a young person in journalism once, Tim?
Not really, no.
You've always been a middle-aged person in journalism.
No, well, no, I was a young person. Yeah. I was the youngest national newspaper person in the lobby in Westminster at one stage, but that seems like a very long time ago.
I was the youngest person full stop in the lobby at one point.
There we go.
There we are. Not anymore, Tim.
No, indeed. We've both moved on. But I'm, who needs a caffeinated drink when I hear that you might be able to get me a job in Formula One? That's very exciting.
So, what do we expect from PMQs today?
Nadeem Zahawi.
Now, it's interesting, of course, because at PMQs last week, Rishi Sunak made clear that he thought it was all done and dusted, all the questions be answered, nothing more to see here.
Let's find out, shall we? Because he's going to get at least 3, if not 6 more questions now. And we'll see how well the Prime Minister is able to answer them. And I think the usual political tactic of not answering questions in Prime Minister's question time is going to be a bit more problematic this week, because if he genuinely doesn't have some answers, that's only going to fuel let's call it a scandal, I suppose. Certainly fuel the sense that Zahawi needs to go and that Downing Street haven't got a grip on this.
What are the particular questions that you think he needs to answer, or at least it's worth Keir Starmer asking? Well,
Starmer's going to want to know what the Prime Minister knew and when he knew it, and based on what he knew, why did he take the decisions that he did? Sunak has fallen back on the classic technique of punt this all off to an independent investigator in the hope that you can say, it's not up to me, it's up to them. But, to a lot of people, that looks like an abrogation of the Prime Minister's responsibility to take a decision. Even as we wait for the verdict of this sage figure, the evidence piles up and more stories are being written. And, the other questions pertain to the Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, who has been there throughout the premierships of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss and now Rishi Sunak, and was in the room, would have known what was going on. And there are some questions there about what did he know about Zahawi's tax affairs, and why, when he was being appointed to different roles, was that not drawn more broadly to the attention of the Prime Minister's making those decisions? Because it seems like not only was Zahawi made Chancellor by Boris Johnson, when Kwasi Kwarteng was removed by Liz Truss, Zahawi was in contention to be Chancellor again and was apparently cleared to do that or another job. And then Rishi Sunak's brought him back in as party chairman. Each of those decisions would normally come with input from the proprietary and ethics team and from the Cabinet Secretary about whether there was anything hanging over these the minister in question as to whether they could do those jobs. Now, it'd be interesting to see if Sunak feels that he got all the information he needs. And if he didn't, why didn't he?
And what's your understanding of when those? Because obviously he was in the cabinet before. Is it a particular problem with him becoming Chancellor that sort of sounded alarm bells, or would it all this has been flagged when he joined the cabinet as Education Secretary?
Well, this sort of thing ought to be flagged regardless of the job you're doing, but clearly it's more acute if you're the bloke handling the nation's finances. And certainly part of the embarrassment for Nadhim Zahawi and the Tory party in the last week has been that, here he was, the bloke in charge of the Exchequer, negotiating with the Exchequer. Now, Tories will say, well, look, he paid a huge fine and paid lots of tax, and that shows the system works, that even the Chancellor of the Exchequer can be made to cough up. But I think people looking at it from outside would say it's rather odd if, the boss is effectively having to cough up money to his underlings. And did he really pay enough? Those are one imagines that HMRC did this in the right way, but the perception that this is all very cosy, which is added to by the fact that the Prime Minister has recruited to look into this the father of his own policy director, and that there's quite a lot of sort of jobs for mates rocking around in this, and that just contributes to the notion that often afflicts the Tory party that they can become, after a period of time in power, as interested in a cosy cabal of people they know as they are in getting on with running the country.
So just a reminder then, at PMQs last week, Alex Sobel, Labour MP, asked the Prime Minister, this month, Nadhim Zahawi was forced to pay millions to HMRC to settle a tax dispute. Was the Prime Minister aware of the investigation when he appointed him to his cabinet and is chairman of the Conservative Party? Will the Prime Minister demand accountability from his cabinet members over their tax affairs? And Rishi Sunak replied, my honourable friend has already addressed the matter in full, and there is nothing more that I can add. I suspect he's going to have to add a little bit more to that as we go live to the House of Commons. This is question number 1 from Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week we will remember the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust and all those scarred by genocide since, as we mark Holocaust Memorial Day. We must all commit across this House to defeat prejudice and hatred wherever we may find it. To work for a better future, we must find light in the darkness. Could also join the Prime Minister in wishing everyone a happy Burns night. Mr. Speaker, Zara Alina was walking home from a night out with her friends when she was savagely attacked, assaulted and beaten to death. Zara was a brilliant young woman, a trainee lawyer with a bright future. Her killer is a violent, racist, woman-hating thug, not fit to walk the same streets. No. But that's precisely the problem. He was free to walk the same streets. Yeah. The inspectorate report into her case says that opportunities were missed by the probation service that could have prevented this attack and saved her life. Does the Prime Minister accept those findings?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this was a truly terrible crime. And as the Chief Inspector has found, the failings in this case, and indeed others, were serious and indeed unacceptable. In both of the cases that are in the public domain, these failures can be traced to failings in the initial risk assessment, and that's why immediate steps are being taken to address the serious issues raised.
Well, we got it all wrong. I suspect Nadhim Zahawi will come up, but
yeah,
first,
I'm pretty sure that But this is a classic wrong-footing technique from Labour to go on a hard and serious subject which affects the lives of the punters. And I would be very surprised if we didn't hear before the end of this section of questions the phrase lethal chaos, which is what Starmer used last week to talk about ambulances. And this week, the former Director of Public Prosecutions seems to want to talk about probation and the problems there, and this sense that stuff just isn't working.
Stuff isn't working, and actually,
lives.
And it goes back to people out of the public eye. We talk about probation services very often, but in this terrible case, John McSweeney attacked Zahawi in June last year, just 9 days after his release on licence from prison, having been wrongly assessed as medium risk. And it's not the only case. We were talking about this with David Wonovich earlier in the week because he wrote his column on it last week. There were other cases where those decisions were wrong. Notably, Rishi Sunak didn't seem to make any great defence of it. He read out, what was clearly in that the whole point of him having that folder was there were lines to take on every possible topic that could be thrown at him. Yeah,
that's right. And also, it's he would be aware of the case, and it's a pretty easy one to emote about and to think that something went wrong. And there's plenty of government politicians who think the probation service is a total shambles as well.
Yeah.
Clearly, ministers are where the buck stops with these things. But, you can think back to numerous cases. Even the former Prime Minister's wife, Carrie Johnson, led a campaign about probation service findings about John Warboys, the black cab rapist. It's been a long theme, going back years, that the probation service doesn't get some of these rulings right.
Yeah. With I suppose, unlike some of the other parts of the state, with terrible, terrible consequences. Let's go back and see what Keir Starmer has to say for question number 2 on PMQs Unpacked.
Keir Starmer.
I'm glad he accepts those findings. The report also says that staffing vacancies and excessive workloads contributed to those fatal failures. And it makes absolutely clear this was not a one-off. As the report says, these are systemic issues in the probation service. They're clearly ministerial responsibilities. Does the Prime Minister accept those findings as well?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me outline for the honourable gentleman exactly what steps we are taking, and that's to ensure that mandatory training to improve risk assessments is being put in place. It's mandating checks with the police and children's services before a probation officer can recommend to the court that a convicted offender be given electronically monitored offence, and implementing new processes to guarantee the swift recall of offenders. And the action we are taking is already making a difference, as, for example, we see in the reduction of the number of electronically monitored curfews being given by the courts.
Interesting, Rishi Sunak talking about mandatory training, mandatory checks, all things you'd have thought might have been there before.
And it read very much like he was reading, didn't it?
Yeah.
That looked like, the golden tab
Yeah.
in his box had come to save him there. It didn't feel like a subject he was particularly au fait with. So Starmer moving on from horrible tragedy to whose fault is it? And, building his argument. As ever, with most of the things that are problematic in British public life at the moment, there's a shortage of staff. People are doing too much. And the Prime Minister, if he was answering honestly, would say, there ain't much money around at the moment. And what are your priorities? But it's a very difficult one to get into that argument. He's not standing on particularly firm ground at the moment.
Luke on the YouTube channel said this is the tamest and most reasonable I've ever seen them both. I suppose that I think that's probably meant as a compliment, that they're both actually trying to address issues and trying to solve the problem rather than just hurling abuse at each other. Will it last? That's the big question. You can watch along on the Times Radio YouTube channel. We go back to the comments. This is question number 3 from Keir Starmer.
Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, it was Barking, Dagenham and Havering that tragically and fatally let Zara down. But across the country, probation services are failing. After a botched, then reversed privatisation, after a decade of underinvestment, it's yet another vital public service on its knees after 13 years of Tory government. I spoke to Zara's family this morning. It's hard to convey to this House the agony that they've been through. They say that the government has blood on their hands over these failings. He's accepted the findings of the report. Does he also accept what Zara's family say?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my heart, of course, goes out to Zara's family. He mentioned accountability. The probation services has taken action where failings have been found and where that has been appropriate. And with regard to the overall service, because of the extra investment we're putting in, there's now £155 million a year being put into the probation service so that we can deliver better supervision of offenders. There's also been an increase in the number of senior probation officers. But one of the other things we must remember, Mr. Speaker, if we do want to increase the safety of women and girls out on our streets, that we need tough sentencing. And that's why this government passed the Police Crime and Sentencing Act, which the honourable gentleman opposite and his party opposed.
The thing that leapt out for me there was getting more political from Keir Starmer, talking about the probation service was privatised, the botched privatisation, as he called it. People with long memories remember that was carried out by Chris Grayling. He privatised it in 2014, and then in 2020 they brought it back in-house to fully restore public ownership and control. I mean, I suppose to some extent, the fact that 2 years on we're still getting these problems is a sign that nobody really quite knows what to do with the probation service.
No, I suspect that's right. I think the way, think back to what Starmer used to do when he first got the job. He would often fall back on territory that he was kind of familiar with. He did a lot of legal stuff. He knew about it. He was trying to show, I know what I'm talking about. But this is much more kind of structured and pointed and talking about,
In fact, he hasn't said, I've prosecuted these cases. No. He's not done, I was director of public prosecutions.
No, and he's picked up the phone to the family, which is
that's
good deft politics,
yeah.
and got the phrase "blood on your hands" into the into Hansard and onto the TV. So this is it's just another example of how Labour has kind of got its act together. Little bit of fight back from Sunak though. Talking about tougher sentencing, that's the first kind of bit where I think he felt sort of he needed to say something for the people behind him and to make a political point of his own. Maybe he thinks it's only 3 questions and he needed to get that in before Starmer moves on.
He might be ready to move on. We'll find out now. This is Times Radio, PMQs Unpacked. Listen along on the radio. You can watch along on the Times Radio YouTube channel, as lots of you are. Let's find out. Is this the moment that Keir Starmer is going to mention Nadeem Zahawi, as we predicted at the beginning? Let's go back to the House of Commons, question number 4.
In light of the case of Zara, I really don't think the Prime Minister should be boasting about the protection that he's putting in place for women. And I'm not going to take lectures from him about that. Does the Prime Minister agree that any politician who seeks to avoid the taxes they owe in this country is not fit to be in charge of taxpayer money?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to make my position on this matter completely clear to the House. The issues in question occurred before I was Prime Minister. With regard to the appointment of the Minister without portfolio, the usual appointments process was followed. No issues were raised with me when he was appointed to his current role. And since I commented on this matter last week, more information has come forward. And that is why I have asked the independent advisor to look into the matter. Now, I obviously can't prejudge the outcome of that, but it is right that we fully investigate this matter and establish all the facts.
Well, here we are.
Beep, 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 beep. That is the sound of a truck being reversed over the Cabinet Secretary. I'll put it to you.
Simon Case, of course.
Simon Case.
Who is very much the constant in all of this. He was there for Boris Johnson, he was there for Liz Truss, and he's still there now for Rishi Sunak.
And Sunak is very clear that none of this was raised with him when he appointed Zahawi. So why wasn't it? Now, that looks slightly cowardly, but if it's true, it does give the PM some protection, and it's always cowardly to go after officials. But, if he wasn't told, he wasn't told. But he's now put that out there.
But given
and if
that there
there is
were-
any evidence that that is not the case, then the Prime Minister is going to be in big trouble.
Is there a responsibility on Rishi Sunak himself, given that there were stories around last summer about Nadeem Zahawi? Should he have asked the question, or maybe he did ask the question, which I was all right, or is it down to the officials around him to sound the alarm?
I think the job of, certainly of the proprietary and ethics team is to draw attention to potential problems. And I've heard numerous cases in these reshuffles where people have said, I don't think you should give a job to them, Prime Minister, because they've got something hanging over them, or there's a problem, or there's a potential issue. And those things are normally drawn to people's attention in that process, and not just the Prime Minister, but to the team around them. That said, Nadeem Zahawi's been asked quite a lot of questions about this by various journalists, and doesn't have a magnificent track record of total
Full
candour.
disclosure. Yes, exactly. And the Times reported today that the people close to Liz Truss making clear that nobody said anything to her about there being an issue when she gave him a job as Cabinet Office Minister.
Yeah.
So do we know...
Or indeed, when she was considering him as a possible return to the Treasury after she'd got rid of Kwasi Kwarteng.
And we don't know if anyone's raised an issue when Boris Johnson was trying. I mean, there were quite febrile.
Mr. Johnson has yet to illuminate us with that information.
Febrile times last summer.
They were febrile times, and Mr. Johnson has issues of his own that he keeps being asked questions about in the public sphere.
Well, we'll see. So yeah, it's quite a lot to unpack there. I'm quite intrigued by more information has come forward since last week. It was not. I mean, the story was in the Sun a week ago, just over, but 10 days ago now, that he'd paid a settlement with HMRC. You do wonder if Rishi Sunak possibly ought to have asked slightly more questions before last week's PMQs.
I mean, some politicians are not avid readers of the newspapers in a way that we might imagine, and I think some of them would rather not be told.
Yeah.
Whether that is the case
Don't
in
ask
this
any
instance,
questions,
I don't know. Though I think probably, Nadeem Zahawi isn't really some great buddy of Rishi Sunak's. He was one of those people who got a job. He'd run for leader. There was some kind of continuity there. He was seen as a sort of medium-sized beast. I don't, no one's really ever said that, Sunak put Zahawi in there because he was some great buddy. He was just one of those sort of people who it was felt that ought to be given a job. So slightly unfortunate for the Sunakians that they've now got caught.
It's always amazing, though, the journalists with half of, access to half the information managed to turn up more than the Prime Minister asking a question of his officials. But there we are. I quite like the idea of being a medium-sized beast.
Well, he's not quite a big beast.
He's not a
is
big
he?
beast. No.
Even whatever it was, 2 months as Chancellor of the Exchequer doesn't quite make a big. I think
He always used to wear quite a big watch.
Yes, he's a wealthy man, as we've discovered.
Yeah. Maybe that's what he spent the money he saved on. Right, let's go back to the House of Commons now. Let's see if Keir Starmer's going to persevere with this. But now to question number 5.
Mr. Speaker, he avoided the question. I think anybody watching would think it's fairly obvious that someone who seeks to avoid tax can't also be in charge of tax. Yet, for some reason, the Prime Minister can't bring himself to say that or even acknowledge the question. Now, last week, the Prime Minister told this House that the chair of the Tory party had addressed his tax affairs in full, and there was nothing to add. This week, after days of public pressure, the Prime Minister now says there are serious questions to answer. What changed?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I know he reads from these prepared sheets, but he should listen to what I actually say.
Rishi Sunak is leaning on his folder of prepared sheets.
Since I commented on this matter last week, more information, including a statement by the Minister without portfolio, has entered the public domain, which is why it's right that we do establish the facts. And Mr. Speaker, let me take a step back. Now, of course, Of course, the politically expedient thing to do would be for me to have said that this matter must have been resolved by Wednesday at noon. But I believe in proper due process. That's why I appointed an independent advisor, and that's why the independent advisor is doing his job. But the opposition can't have it both ways. The shadow leader, also his party chair, both urged me and the government to appoint an independent advisor. And now he objects to that independent advisor doing their job. It's simple political opportunism, and everyone can see through it.
I mean, if I was Nadeem Zahawi, I'd be pretty worried if the Prime Minister is willing to admit in the cabinet, in the dispatch box, that politically the right thing to do is to sack him.
Yes.
It would be, of course, it would be the politically expedient thing to do.
Well, or to order the independent advisor to come up with his independent answer before Prime Minister's question time.
Do you want to address the lack of independence of the independent advisor, given that he's appointed by Rishi Sunak? He's not independent of Rishi Sunak at all.
Well, none of them ever have been.
Yeah.
And they have a mysterious habit of finding what the Prime Minister hopes that they would find.
And if they don't, the Prime Minister has a habit of ignoring them.
Yes, well, the previous one did, and one of the previous ones did. Anyway, yeah. Well, I mean, it's a bravura attempt, accusing the leader of the opposition of political opportunism. One is tempted to say that in cases like this, that's kind of the leader of the opposition's job.
And it's sort of the last resort of a Prime Minister who doesn't really have anything else to accuse the leader of the opposition of playing politics.
But still a sort of slight indignant tone from Sunak, who genuinely does believe in process. He's that dull. Yeah. He really, really believes in sitting down and doing everything properly. But unfortunately, what that can often lead to in situations like this is that Rishi Sunak is not immediately quick to see the way the wind is blowing. The same thing happened, whisper it quietly, over his wife's tax affairs, where he didn't really see the problem.
There's a bit of needling from I mean, that question which he's now used twice, Keir Starmer, saying, should someone who's in charge, should someone who tries to avoid paying tax be in charge of the nation's tax? I mean, it's not very far from the issue that Rishi Sunak had about non-dom status of his wife.
Well, I mean, it may be that Starmer is building up to make that point in his final question, but Sunak, a lot of people who know Sunak quite well think he's, reasonably good at turning up and doing the job, and a serious bloke, genuinely believes in process, but his sort of fingertip touch for politics is not as acute as it might be. That's why he didn't see this coming, and it's why he has responded quite slowly to a story gathering pace, and he'll be hoping that the independent advisor gives him a simple way out, whichever way that is.
Loads of you getting in touch about this, wondering where Nadeem Zahawi is.
Well, he's not sitting on the government front bench, so far as I can see.
Michael, though, has been in touch saying, Matt, your very bitchy take on Sunak demeans you and Shipman. Focusing on a big watch is genuinely pathetic. Be professional, please. Actually, we're talking about Nadeem Zahawi's big watch, not Rishi Sunak's.
Yeah, a big watch would look slightly odd on Rishi Sunak's wrist.
I think he's got like a little Disney one, isn't he? Mickey Mouse's arms going round.
I have no knowledge of the Prime Minister's watch. Boris Johnson used to wear a very cheap watch. That much I do remember. It was about £5.
Jeremy Browne had a selection of different coloured watches that he'd wear depending, to coordinate with his tie.
The person with the best watch collection in Parliament is Brandon Lewis, who has a series of astonishingly expensive watches.
Does he?
He does.
Does he? There's a feature in that. I'll get on that. My watch of the week. 87222, start measure the word times. If you want to get in touch, you can post your comments along on the YouTube channel. Here we go. This is question number 6 then from Keir Starmer.
Keir Starmer, we all know why the Prime Minister was reluctant to ask his party chair questions about family finances and tax avoidance.
And there we have it, a reference to
his failure. His
two
failure
Labour
to
MPs shouting
when
more.
The whole country can see what's going on shows how hopelessly weak he is. A Prime Minister overseeing chaos, overwhelmed at every turn. He can't say when ambulances will get to heart attack victims again. He
what
can't
he did
say
last
when
week.
the prison system will keep streets safe again. He can't even deal with tax avoiders in his own cabinet. Is he starting to wonder if this job is just too big for him?
It's a height joke, that, isn't it? Michael on the text won't like that.
Mr. Speaker, the difference between him and me is that I stand by my values and my principles even when it is difficult. When I disagreed fundamentally with the previous Prime Minister, I resigned from the government. But for four long years, he sat next to the member for Islington North.
Oh, that's a Jeremy Corbyn. There we are.
Anti-Semitism ran rife. When his predecessor sided with our opponents. That's what's weak, Mr. Speaker. He has no principles and just petty politics.
Oh, was that it? There we are. No principles, just petty politics.
Well,
we had all of the... I mean, you're right that in the end, Keir Starmer tried to tie it all together, talking about you can't do anything about ambulance times, which is what he went on PMQs last week, safety on our streets, and then propriety in the cabinet, trying to sort of knot it all
yeah, he
together.
didn't use lethal chaos, though, which I thought he would, because that would have been perfectly legitimate to use that phrase again, which I thought was quite effective. But the sort of the little jibe at, is this just all too big for him? It's quite an interesting kind of semi-heightist attack that is just sort of saying this poor little fella's completely overwhelmed by all this. But Sunak's response did not seem particularly sure-footed. When he's boasting about resigning from Boris Johnson's government, the one thing that most of his own party holds against him.
Yeah.
And then resorting to Boris Johnson's attack lines on Jeremy Corbyn, you look down that front bench, it didn't look like a cabinet that was particularly enjoying
I'm not
itself
sure.
today.
I'm not sure. I quit to get rid of Boris Johnson, but you didn't quit to get rid of Jeremy Corbyn. Who's going to fly at the next election.
No, and the Tories badly need some Starmer gear that is not just replaying these old tropes. There are criticisms of Keir Starmer that you can make and that the Tories will make at the next election, that he changes his mind, that he doesn't necessarily stick to the things that he said in the past, that he's rather dull, and that but the sort of charge that he's just this sort of manic political operative is a slightly curious one, given that for a long time Starmer was very far from being that kind of character. If anything, he was sort of too punctilious in the other direction. Now he's got some more game. His team around him have sharpened him up. But nothing that Sunak's just come out with sounds like anything that's going to cause the Labour Party any problems up to the next general election.
And if your complaint is basically you're getting a bit too good at playing politics, then that's sort of saying the bit out loud that maybe you
well, and only
you
drawing attention to the fact that a lot of people think
Yeah.
Sunak might be good at government, but he isn't terribly good at politics himself. And I think this will be people will want this resolved in the Conservative Party pretty fast. And I suspect the bulk of them would like to see the Prime Minister step up, look decisive, and get rid of Nadeem Zahawi and get this problem off the front pages.
So there we are. That brings us to the end of PMQs Unpacked. Carlos says, if Jeremy Corbyn got £1 every time he was mentioned in PMQs, would he be as rich as Nadeem Zahawi?
It'd be like having a magic money tree, wouldn't it?
We know they don't exist. Coming up, we will bring you the best of the West. Lara Spirit's been watching them so that you don't have to. Tim Shipman's still here, chief political commentator of the Sunday Times. We'll round up the best of the West, and then we're going to talk about politicians and their CVs, which don't necessarily pan out. We'll do that in the next half an hour after we get the latest news from Jeremy Leeburn.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thanks, Matt. Good afternoon. Germany has now confirmed after weeks of hesitation that it will send battle tanks to Ukraine. The Prime Minister has called it the right decision. Overnight, in response to reports this move was coming, the Kremlin warned that armoured vehicles supplied to Kyiv by the West would burn. Moscow sees this development and a similar approval expected from Washington later as provocation. The Prime Minister has defended his appointment of Nadeem Zahawi, who's facing mounting calls to resign over his tax affairs. Rishi Sunak says no issues were raised with him when he hired Mr Zahawi as Tory party chair and the usual process was followed. But Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer isn't convinced.
It's fairly obvious that someone who seeks to avoid tax can't also be in charge of tax. Yet, for some reason, the Prime Minister can't bring himself to say that.
Mr Zahawi settled a multi-million-pound settlement with HMRC, including a penalty when he was Chancellor. The International Council of Nurses has criticised the UK's move to recruit nurses from less wealthy countries to plug a staffing crisis in the NHS. The government's confirmed to Times Radio that it's in talks with Ghana, but the ICN says Ghana's struggling to recruit health workers to care for its own people. And a man who transitioned to a woman after raping 2 women is now thought to be in a segregation unit at a women's prison in Scotland. Isla Bryson, who used to be called Adam Graham, was found guilty of both offences and is being held until their sentencing at the end of February. Cloud and rain moving south, brighter in the north later. Kane Reeves has the sport.
Everton owner Farhad Moshiri insists the club is not for sale, despite widespread reports he's keen to give up the Merseyside club. Last week, the Everton owner met with the Everton Fan Advisory Board and stated that he's only looking for investment for a new stadium.
The club is not for sale, but I've been talking to top investors, really quality, to bridge a gap on a stadium. I can do it myself. And the reason I want to do is to bring top sport investors into Everton for some of the reasons that the fan want improvement.
Everton are 19th in the Premier League and looking for their 6th manager in 5 years after sacking Frank Lampard this week. You can read the Times report on Everton's collapse into chaos on our website and app. Novak Djokovic continues to prove he's the man to beat after reaching the semi-finals of the Australian Open. The 9-time champion has beaten 5th seed Andrei Rublev in straight sets, with American Tommy Paul now waiting for him in the last 4. Paul is the first American into the semi-finals of the Australian Open since Andy Roddick in 2009 after getting past compatriot Ben Shelton.
Yeah, man, I'm really excited. It wasn't like the prettiest match ever today, but it was how I needed to play the match. It was how the match I felt like was always going to be. He's a great server, and I had to just put in as many returns as I could. But I'm really excited, man. It's really cool.
Meanwhile, tennis legend Billie Jean King has called on Wimbledon to end its ban on Russian and Belarusian players for this year's tournament. 3 of the 4 women's singles semi-finalists at the Australian Open are from those countries. King says Wimbledon should follow other tournaments by allowing players from affected countries to compete under a neutral flag. You can read more on these stories by clicking on the Times website and app.
This
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, and on your smart speaker, Matt Chorley on Times Radio.
Very good afternoon to you. It's Matt Chorley on Times Radio, bringing you PMQs Unpacked. You can listen along on Times Radio. Watch along on the Times Radio YouTube channel, where somebody's noticed that somebody's asking if Tim Shipman's wearing boating at where. Sort of fetching
I have no requirement today to wear a jacket, so I've just got a shirt on, and it's not terribly warm about the place. So I've got a kind of rugby shirty type thing with a bit of
sort very nice,
vaguely nautical.
Vaguely nautical. Also on the YouTube channel, there was somebody. We've been running a poll. Are your tax affairs 100% in order? And 7% of people said no.
Well, I'm still waiting for my accountant to provide me with how much I owe them this year. So
you haven't got long.
No.
TikTok. If you come in next week with a big watch on, we know what's gone on. Right, Lara Spirit, Times Red Box reporter, is here. How are you?
Hi, Matt. I'm well, thank you.
So you're bringing us the best of the rest. You've been watching the rest of the questions so that we don't have to.
I have been, yeah. And some great.
Oh, good. That's it. Talk it up. Make it sound. Stay tuned.
Stick around.
Right. Yeah, don't go anywhere. It's all going to kick off. Lara, where are we going first?
So we're going first to Stephen Flynn to take a listen to this. He is asking the second question, and it's quite a classic example of the sort of SNP in Prime Minister's Questions scorecard, where you try and take all of the worst stories for the government in the week, and then you lump it together and say, isn't everyone in Scotland going to be absolutely furious and dismayed by this? So just listen to this.
I'm not sure what question the Prime Minister thought I asked, but that certainly was not it, Mr. Speaker. But let's be clear about this. This is now a matter of the Prime Minister's own integrity and accountability. After all, when there was questions about the Home Secretary, the Secretary, and concerns about her role in relation to national security, he chose to back her. Now the chair of the Tory party, he's choosing to back him despite a £5 million penalty from HMRC. And of course, he's seeking to protect the former Prime Minister despite his cosy financial relationship with the chair of the BBC. Is it little wonder that people in Scotland may well just consider the Tory party to be a parcel of rogues?
Mr. Speaker, what I'm standing up for is proper due process. That's why we have an independent advisor. It's right that the independent advisor conducts his investigation. That's how we will ensure accountability, and that's what I will deliver.
Rob Roberts!
Parcel of rogues is a good turn of phrase.
Oh, that's good. I like that. I wonder if Starmer will nick that. You parcel of rogues.
Now, for those of you not watching on the YouTube channel, we can see Ian Blackford sitting slightly forlornly behind Stephen Flynn, where he used to do these PMQs before.
Just
Stephen.
a humble crofter.
Just a humble crofter again now. While Stephen
now
Flynn.
a humble backbencher.
Now, one thing that struck me, Lara, Stephen Flynn standing up, one hand in his pocket, and no notes.
No, you're right. Yeah.
He's actually doing it properly. He's, he knows what he wants to say and he's performing.
He does seem to be giving a pretty assured performance in Prime Minister's Questions. He seems relatively confident when he stands up. I think you'd expect first few showings to be a little bit nervous, but actually he seems to be getting in the groove. I mean, the SNP do just have a very well-oiled process of doing these questions, right? They're a couple. They often stand up. They manage to take whatever it is that's been embarrassing to the government, and they say that it's a perfect case for independence, well made. So, I mean, nothing new there.
I love Flynn. I love him. He's like there's sort of the suppressed violence every time he stands up. It's sort of he looks like if you encountered him, on a Saturday evening, he might give you a very good pointed question, or he might just nut you.
I've just realised "Parcel of Rogues" is such a parcel of rogues in a nation is a Scottish folk song whose lyrics are taken from a poem written by Robert Burns.
A Burns night.
A little Burns night nod there.
Yeah. And good old Sunak's response, he's standing up for due process. I mean, they're literally in the streets now, aren't they, going, what do we want? Standing up for due process. When do we want it? At a time that seems appropriate if the due process has been followed.
You're quite right. We don't want you to sack the person that everyone else thinks you need to and will sack until you've gone through a process of which you are the arbiter of. And anyway, decide on. Right, good. Well, that was Stephen Flynn, leader of the SNP. What about the backbenchers? What have we got, Lara?
So just, to stress my powers of premonition earlier, I think you remember me saying that I thought there'd be a question or maybe two on the unsuccessful levelling up bids from last week. And the second question of the day, Marco Longhi, the Conservative MP for Dudley, stood up and said, very disappointed to have not got his bid, but he hopes the Prime Minister will meet with him. And I thought that Rishi Sunak's response to this was quite interesting because we haven't had that much by way of government response to the fallout from what was quite a messy comms operation.
Well, particularly because when he wanted to be talking about levelling up, we ended up having to talk about seatbelts, which is a slight problem. So we're going to hear from Marco Longhi. Here we go.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While I was disappointed that Dudley did not make the final cut in the latest levelling up funding round, I am, of course, pleased that we received the £25 million Towns deal, the brand new Duncan Edwards leisure facility, and a transport interchange project secured since my election in 2019. But our high street, Mr. Speaker, is on its knees. So will the Prime Minister meet with me at the Council to discuss the bid and how we ensure success in the next round?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is a great advocate for his constituents.
Well, not that great, because he didn't get the money last time.
And I'm delighted that, thanks to his efforts, Dudley has received £25 million from the Towns Fund. I know there will be disappointment about the Levelling Up Fund, but all bids, including that made by Dudley Council, can receive feedback to strengthen their bid for future rounds of funding, and I would be very happy to meet him further to discuss.
There we are.
He's got his meeting.
Give it another go.
Yeah. Brilliant advocate. Well done.
But the point is, Lara, that it takes quite a lot for a Tory MP to use PMQs to even hint at criticism of the Prime Minister.
Yeah, so he's evidently not very happy with the outcome of this, and it reflects what quite a few of us have been hearing from Tory MPs, some of whom were, asked to shout loud and proud about this Levelling Up Fund, only to feel bitterly disappointed and quite foolish when they weren't selected as part of that bid. But I thought, Rishi Sunak keen to stress the Towns Fund. It was interesting, quite a lively chamber today, but interesting to hear colleagues kind of cheer quite a lot when you heard about that Towns Fund. There's definitely quite a concerted effort going on to stress that this £2 billion fund from last week is just one part of a wider Levelling Up package. So, of course, devolution deals are massive part of that. I mean, if you think about the North East, that got a £1.4 billion devolution deal before
and
Christmas.
I suppose that's the trouble
huge.
with the Levelling Up thing last week. Sounded like this is it. This is the entirety of Levelling Up.
Exactly.
And it just isn't.
And also, that allusion to the third process and the fact that Marco can get some feedback if he didn't quite fill out his forms properly.
Lots of you getting in touch about why I didn't know that Parcel of Rogues was a Burns quote.
But also, significantly, it was a diatribe against people who signed the Act of Union. So it's even more pointed, pro-independence ditty.
I've also found out that Duncan Edwards, who the sports centre's named after, was one of the Busby Babes.
Yeah.
Didn't know that either. Who died in the Munich air disaster. Every day is a school day. Thank you for that, Lara. What time can people get Red Box PMQs Unpacked email in their inbox?
2:30.
2:30. If you keep saying it, there's no way you're allowed to miss your deadline.
Thanks, Matt.
Tim, busy week ahead of... What, do you know what? I suppose it depends whether or not Nadeem Zahawi's still there by the weekend, presumably.
I think it's very likely I'll be writing about what can only be described this week as the general mess. What is it? How is it? Why is it? And what are they doing about it?
General mess could be
at
Tory
the moment,
Party chairman by the end of the week.
It's been quite dull. There's each week I try to find a different subject for my long read, but this week it's just
mess.
Get stuck in.
Lovely stuff. You can read that, of course, in the Sunday Times of the weekend. Right, coming up, we're going to look at MPs and their CVs, which don't necessarily add up, and then we'll play the quiz. It's Matt Chorley on Times Radio.
Times Radio Drive with Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Build your wealth with confidence. Every Friday afternoon from 4. Join Times Radio Drive for a perfectly balanced portfolio of up-to-the-minute news, unrivaled analysis and expert opinion. Plus, in-depth interviews that take you to the heart of the story. Times Radio Drive. Every Friday afternoon from 4 with Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Can-Do is offering you unwavering support in challenging times. Visit candowealth.com today.
The Chancellor today announced markets reacted unanimously. Interest rates will rise.
Just because the economy is uncertain doesn't mean you need to be. At RBC Brewin Dolphin, our advice is always focused on establishing clarity, reaching stability, and steering your investment plans towards a more certain future. To speak to a financial advisor, search RBC Brewin Dolphin. Good decisions follow smart advice. Capital and any income from it is at risk.
Travel far, travel wide, travel wild or with a guide. Travel carefree, travel light, travel where your heart takes flight. Travel into unknown lands, travel in the safest hands. Travel deep, travel long, travel boldly, travel on. The Kuoni sale is now on. Search KUONI and travel with the experts you can trust. Voted by Times readers the #1 best luxury tour operator.
Matt Chorley on Times Radio.
Matt Chorley on Times Radio. Now, we've talked a lot about Nadeem Zahawi and his taxes and what he got up to last summer, but it's also turned out that he was writing his memoirs on top of everything else. Although, as the Times points out today, he may have been 8, 9, 10 or 11 when he fled Iraq and moved to the UK. It's not entirely clear. And it counts in various interviews and on his own website, the various different facts that he has